All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Brown Bag. Just one more quick reminder before we get underway that if you haven't voted for Sorcerer's nominations, it closes at 4 o'clock today. Please do so if you haven't already right after you leave feedback for this presentation. All right, so today's Brown Bag, I'm going to be talking about the age-old adage: the best programmers are lazy programmers. In preparation for this, I did try and see if I could find the source of this this quote or adage. I wasn't able to find it directly. There are a number of luminaries that sort of said related things. Larry Wall spoke about 3 virtues of a great programmer: laziness, impatience, and hubris. Bill Gates allegedly said, "I chose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." And various other luminaries such as Martin Fowler have said similar things about laziness being a virtue when it comes to programming. But I wasn't able to find this exact quote, even though we've probably all heard it before. On the contra side, what I want to do today is kind of talk at first a little bit spoilers. I'm going to reveal in the first couple of slides whether I personally think it's a good thing or not. But I think the key to understanding whether a lazy programmer is really a good programmer is actually defining what it means to be a lazy programmer. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go through some of the behaviors that a lazy programmer exhibits and why I think they're good or not. And this is kind of, a quote on the contra side, right? Think about it. Every single corpse on Mount Everest was once a highly motivated person, which is true. I doubt there are very many people that are not motivated that wake up one day and choose to climb Mount Everest. It takes a lot of preparation, a lot of time. And it's important to point out that we're not talking here about bad programmers. So we're not talking about programmers that can't be really bothered thinking about a problem and just code the first thing that comes into their head. We're not talking about programmers that avoid responsibility or take 3 times as long as another programmer to get a task done. We're not talking about the kinds of people that can never be bothered to turn up to meetings. I think we can all agree those are bad behaviors, right? So what do we mean when we talk about lazy programmers? One definition: they don't do more work than necessary and they hate to do things more than once. The key word there is necessary, right? So we're not talking about people that don't do what they need to do to get their job done. We're talking about people that don't do more than they need to. And this presentation, although it's kind of entitled, lazy programmers make great programmers, it's not just, most of the points I'm going to talk about are not just applicable to programmers, but to really kind of any role that you might perform. So how are we going to define it? So I'm kind of defining it as a lazy programmer is someone that puts in minimal effort to get maximal results out. So if you imagine your average programmer kind of having a linear relationship between the work that they put in and the results that they get out, we're talking about someone that has a non-linear relationship there. So, they can achieve a lot with very little, and as their work or their effort increases, the results increase much more dramatically than just a kind of work an extra day, get an extra day of work's done. So you might ask, how does a lazy programmer do this? How do they get this efficiency and kind of an exponential relationship between the work that they put in and the results that they get out. So they prioritize their time effectively. And I'm not just talking here about, being on time to things, sticking to schedules and all that kind of stuff. What I'm talking about here is that they don't waste time doing the drudge work. I'm sure you're all familiar with, the saying that that programming is essentially just advanced data entry, right? And a lot of what we do does fall into that category. There's a lot of drudge work where we're creating just another screen, just another table, just another set of CRUD operations on that data. So a lazy programmer minimizes the amount of time they spend on that. They don't waste a lot of time going through the stuff that has to be done over and over again. They try and reuse code. They try and use automation and other things to make that stuff really quick and efficient. And then they spend the majority of their time on the interesting and difficult bits, because that's really where developers, particularly experienced and skillful developers, can add the most value. Another trait, they exploit the rules. So they understand the reasons why we have things like coding guidelines, like linters, prettifiers, design patterns, all of those rules of software development. So for example, they if they're introduced to, if someone says to them, you have to write less code. The less code you write, the better. They think about what that really means and how they can write really efficient and effective code. They don't just shorten all the variable names, because that obviously would also result in less code, but it becomes less easy to read and understand what's happening. So they don't slavishly follow rules, but they try and understand why those rules are in place and how they can exploit them to do the least amount of work they can to get the job done. Obviously, this also means they're much better at abstraction and reuse. When you've seen the same problem a number of times, you kind of want to solve it once and then package it up and make it reusable both for yourself and for others. So obviously it may take more work up front to create a nice reusable framework and set of patterns for creating a particular piece of functionality. But over time, that upfront investment will save a lot more time, because they're not having to do everything from scratch every single time. And it's key here, like I said in the last point, that they don't just look up a pattern on the internet and copy and paste the code without really understanding why we use the pattern and why it's applicable to the problem they're trying to solve, or maybe not applicable for that problem. They write minimally sufficient code. So they don't write insufficient code, right? There's another great quote from Martin Fowler. Any fool can write code that a computer can understand, but good programmers write code that humans can understand. So they keep their code simple, but still understandable. They keep their code, they minimize the repetition in their code. They kind of do it once, they do it well, and then they reuse that across their entire code base to prevent them from having to redo that work time and time again. Hopefully, at least all the developers are familiar with these acronyms, DRY and KISS. DRY, don't repeat yourself. So it's basically talking about, not copy pasting the same code all throughout your code base, but having it done once and then using that code where it needs to be used. And KISS, keep it simple, stupid, which I think can apply to everything, not just development. So the key here is they don't write insufficient or simplistic code that hasn't been properly thought through. They actually do the opposite. They spend the time up front to think through the problem, come up with a nice, simple and elegant solution to that problem. They write that once and then they reuse that wherever it needs to be done. They also use a lot of tooling automation and scripting. So, where they can see that there is, a repetitive, boring, if you like, task that has to be done over and over again. They invest the time to create some automation around that so that they do it once, and then it can be done over and over again with the click of the button. The prime examples for this kind of stuff are, unit testing. Obviously, is a prime example. You write those tests once. You obviously need to maintain them as you go, but then as the body of tests grows, you can just run them all very quickly and easily. Other good examples are data import and export, migration scripts, deployment scripts, all of that sort of stuff, where you have to do it multiple times. And rather than having to go through and manually do that every single time, they write a script once, and then they can do it very quickly and easily in the subsequent times. There's a caveat to this, that they also know when not to automate. So if it's a task that they're only ever going to do once, or maybe 2 or 3 times, then there's probably very little value in investing a lot of time in creating a nice set of scripts to automate that process. Obviously there can be other advantages to automation, but it's the kind of task, if it's only going to be done a couple of times, it might be quicker and more efficient to not automate it in that case and just do it by hand. The other key thing they avoid, I'll use another acronym here, is they avoid not invented here syndrome. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every single time, they look for existing solutions out there that they can reuse, be it inside the code, inside the automation and scripting, inside their tooling even. There's a real tendency, it's common enough that we have an acronym for it, for developers to go away and write their own time-sheeting system, to use an example that we're kind of talking about at the moment. But in reality, there's a ton of other things out there that are being done by other people that are maintained by them, and the cost and the amount of time the amount of effort required over time means that it's often more expensive to kind of do it yourself than to just pay an expert to do it for you. They write effective documentation. This is often an area that's not done well by developers, but a lazy developer sees that if they write really good documentation once, then it's done. It can be used by anyone, and they're not going to have people constantly asking them about this feature. They can just say, there's a documentation, go and read it. Come back to me if you have questions. They don't see documentation as an overhead. There's that saying, give a man a fish and he will eat for a day. Give him a fishing rod and you'll eat for life. I think there's a similar kind of principle that applies here. Give a programmer a solution and they can fix it once. Give them the documentation, they can fix it forever. So for a lazy developer, it's really key to make sure that they don't have to keep coming back to this time and time again. So they write it once, they document it, and then they hand it over to others to use and maintain and enhance as needed. They consult widely. They recognize the value of their peers, and building a consensus for any decisions that they're making, but they own making decisions, so they don't like to waste a lot of time kind of talking about the same thing over and over again. And eventually they make a call. They say, it's enough work, enough effort on this particular topic. Let's make a decision. Let's live with it for a while. Conversely, they don't try and solve every problem themselves. There are generally, in any team, there will be other individuals who are more capable or have more time or whatever the factor might be that makes them more appropriate for a particular task. They don't try and do everything. They, to get on to the next slide, they delegate effectively. So not only do they teach and mentor others, but they also know when something needs to be done by them, and when it doesn't, they're able to delegate that out to someone and trust that person to get the job done. They definitely don't avoid responsibility. Often someone might come to them with a task and they identify it's that they're not the right person to do the task. So they'll go back and say, they'll delegate back to that person, I'm not the right person for this task. Please find someone else to do it. This is the skill set you need. On a side note, I had to fit in rugby somewhere in the presentation. And finally, this one might seem a little odd, I guess, but they make themselves obsolete. So, the smallest amount of work is no work. So if they can put in systems in place, if they can set a team up, if they can get the automation all there, if they can provide effective documentation, then they can move on to another task and let another developer maintain that software over time. And note, it doesn't mean that they are useless. It doesn't mean that they don't do the job and no one wants them around. It means that they've done such a good job that they no longer need to be personally involved in doing it. And I think that last point is key. So they make themselves obsolete while still being wanted in the team. So it's not that the team doesn't want them around, it's just that they're no longer needed. And if the team wants them and they want to be involved, then they can step back in and help out. And related to this, another one of my most favorite quotes: good leaders are irreplaceable, but great leaders make themselves redundant, which is kind of a follow on from that. But if you're in a leadership position, obviously the worst thing you can do is not be wanted there. The next big thing is to do such a good job and do so much yourself that you become irreplaceable to the team. And if you're out sick or you're off on holiday, the things start falling apart because you're not there to do it yourself. But really great leaders, really great programmers, kind of in any role really, they make themselves redundant, so they no longer need to be there for everything to function effectively, or as effectively as if they were there in person. So, in short, I think the qualities of a lazy programmer are that they want to do as little as possible right now. So they minimize the amount of work they do now, but they also want to do as little in future as possible. So they make sure that the effort they do invest it goes into putting in place automation and documentation and good design patterns in the code and reusable functions and libraries, and so that they have to do as little work in the future as well as little work right now. And yeah, that has the result mentioned there. So it makes what they do efficient, concise, easy to understand, and easy to replace both their role and the work that they have done. So I think it's pretty clear that I think laziness is a good trait in a developer. And I think we should all try and be a little more lazy in our development and in general in everything that we do. And that's the end of what I have prepared today. Do we have any questions?